the point I was trying to make here is that if women have this mating pressure that exists, that doesn't exist the other way back, like if I'm going to be going out on a date with a woman, there's no world that exists where I'm going to either have the assumption, like women do, or even think it's a possibility that when I go on a date with her, she's going to pay the entire thing. It's dubious if she'll even go 50-50. I've had that's happened, but the majority of the time there is a very strong expectation that men are going to pay on first dates. This is not like some patriarchal system. This is actually a system, hold on, I'll get to you in a sec. This is a system that women enforce. This isn't like men aren't forcing women to have a preference towards providers. I'm sure men would like be super enthused if women were just simping for them all the time and just like, here's money, taking them on dates. The reality is women place a mating pressure on men that doesn't exist the other way. And there's plenty of other factors, but I think looking at this alone would explain any supposed or alleged wage gap that exists. Because essentially it boils down to this. Women are saying, you can't have sex with me, you can't be in a relationship with me, you won't be able to reproduce, which is like a biological imperative for both sexes. But as it relates to men,
we all need each other for sure.
But if women are basically saying, I won't date you, I won't have sex with you, I won't give you my time, I won't give you my attention, I won't give you children down the road, essentially, because dating leads to relationship, leads to marriage, leads to children, seems like that's a really big mating pressure on men. So if men like somewhere back, either it's in their conscious or subconscious brain, are thinking, if I don't have a high-paying, high-status job, and that's going to prevent me from getting a partner and getting a woman and eventually having children, I think that would be a massive motivating pressure that women are putting on men that would lead them to greater motivation and greater achievement and ultimately greater earnings. So the earnings gap, the wage gap, whatever you like to call it, is actually explained by women's sexism. Go ahead.
If I understand where you're coming from. However, if you take what you're saying and put it towards the history of the world, let's just talk about the U.S. for a second. The history of the U.S. 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, 10s.
What about it?
Men had the jobs and women often did not get hired. Women often had no job. Women often were not invited to have a job. And women often just weren't even allowed to have a job. Their job was to find a man, get married, and have children. So
women have always worked, but okay.
But what? In like a small factory for a penny an hour while men were in like actual jobs?
You think in the 1920s there were like an abundance of cushy jobs? Like 99% of men had like, and they had super dangerous jobs.
And women weren't allowed to work in those jobs, even if they needed the money.
No, that's fine. Let me ask you a question. You're living
but can I finish my thought?
One quick question, and I promise I'll let you finish.
Okay.
You're living in 1930s, 1920s Pennsylvania with the coal mines.
Right.
You have a choice. You can go into the coal mines as a woman. You can be the first. Well, hold on. I'm asking.
Flashdance is my favorite movie, so.
Okay, great.
Well,
So
Pittsburgh, totally.
Great, thank you for that non sequitur. So anyways, let's say you had a choice. You could go into the coal mines and get black lung and die like in your 30s or 40s of lung cancer.
Totally.
Or you could stay home and be a homemaker. Which would you prefer?
Which was I allowed to do?
No, which would you prefer?
If I was broke, probably a coal miner. Because
answer
people,
the question.
No, that's my answer.
No, but hold on. Answer the question. If you had the choice, and here are your two choices, to be a homemaker and your husband goes into the coal mines, or you get to go into the coal mines and I guess your husband stays home. I don't know what the deal is.
But the problem with your question...
What's the problem with the question?
Is that women back then did not get a choice.
Okay, sure. I'm going to grant.
They were told, you can't work in this coal mine. Too dangerous for you, too whatever.
I'm not sure.
No, they were told your job is to be a homemaker. Even if you don't have kids. Sure. No. Even if you don't have kids, Your job as a woman is not to work in some sort of a physical demanding job. It's not to be a CEO. It's not to be anything. But it's not to be anything that involves work. Women do not really get jobs. You can be a receptionist in the 50s if you want. But other than that, women were not given the choice. Even if you're a single woman by yourself with no kids who needs money because you're going to be homeless.
Are you going to answer my question, though?
I'm answering right now.
You're not answering the question.
You were not given the choice to work.
Women did have the choice to work, and they did work.
Barely.
What do you mean,
like
barely?
Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? Like, it was not a situation where lots of women were available to work. And so, through generations and slow decline, where women were slowly able to work more, it was still a very normal, like almost taught thing for women to not work. And nowadays, it's so much common for women to work, which is great.
Sure.
However,
do you want to answer the question, though?
what is it?
Okay, if you had the choice between being a homemaker or working in a coal mine and like
In
dying
what,
of
1920s?
emphysema in your 40s,
In
and
1920s?
Sure, 1920s.
I wouldn't get the choice. That's my choice.
Let's say you did. It's a hypothetical.
If I begged and pleaded,
it has nothing to do with begging
I would pick
or not.
the coal mine.
You know what? They're putting out the coal mine's putting out a program. They're like, we're going to hire one woman, so you do get the choice in this
I would
hypothetical.
want to work.
You'd prefer to work in the coal mine than be a homemaker.
Yes.
Really?
If I was by
Okay.
myself
All right.
and I
There you
didn't
go.
have money and I needed money to live, yeah, I'd rather
That's
work in the
not-
coal
that's-
mine.
That's not really the purview of the hypothetical. You're adding
But the hypothetical doesn't make any sense. If I had the choice and my life was perfect, obviously I wouldn't want to work in a coal mine. But back then, there weren't that many options. And if I was a poor woman who didn't have a source of income, who didn't have a husband, I would much rather work in a coal mine than sit in a house by myself. A house I couldn't afford because I didn't have a job, because I wasn't allowed one. I would have to marry a man. That is my job. Back then.
Throughout all this claim that women weren't allowed to work through history is just demonstrably false. Women have always been able to work.
But what? Out of 100 women, 10 women could work?
All women could work, but many women opted. It was just the sort of.
You're so wrong about that.
How am I wrong?
Because women were often never hired, and if they were hired for much less money than they deserved.
What evidence do you have for this?
History books.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and I want to move off of the wage gap here pretty soon.
My grandpa was a coal miner, so just let me know.
Thank you
I
for
just
that.
heard that. I was
Yeah.
like, this is my time.
If it was actually the case that women were paid more than men, what's actually stopping companies? And you would agree that companies, their goal is to make money?
Okay.
Like, do you think most
capitalism society,
do you think
yes.
would you agree with me that corporations are extremely greedy?
Yes.
And their primary goal is to generate profit?
Yeah.
Like, you would agree that you might say that corporations, like there is sexism in corporations. You'd probably argue that because men occupy the highest positions in these corporations, like they're part of the executive team, they're part of the board, whatever, the CEOs, et cetera. You would say that there could be sexism in these corporations.
There could be.
Right. Or you probably say that there is. So, but you would agree that also corporations' primary motive is profit and money.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So do you think that corporations prioritize their alleged or supposed sexism over making money?
No.
Okay, so then if that was genuinely the case, that you could genuinely get away with paying women less, what is stopping from corporations just exclusively hiring women and saving like 30% or 20% on their payroll expenses and beating out their competitors by only hiring women?
Because men believe that men make more money and men
Men
are
will sue.
better at their jobs. So a CEO man who is sexist, I mean, I don't know these people.
But you're saying it's the case that women are just as good as men.
Yeah.
Okay. So then if that's the case, if that's your worldview.
That's mine. That's not a man's. That's not every man's worldview.
Okay, so but what is, again, if it's actually true that you can get away with paying these women 30%, 20%, why don't the companies just hire women?
Because they don't like women.
But I thought profit was the ultimate motivator, not just like boys club sexism.
Yeah. But they're scared they're going to get a what's it called? A lawsuit. They're scared they're going to get a lawsuit, a sexism lawsuit, an ageism lawsuit, a pregnancy lawsuit. They're scared.
There's literally women. There's gyms just for women out here in the valley, and men sued because they can't come in. So like, People
Okay,
sue all the
sure.
time.
It's
We're
well, I
talking
guess
about
you're
this
not
hypothetical
in California, You're
situation.
not supposed to discriminate.
If you can bring in a male CEO who is known for discriminating against women and ask him these questions and he gives you real answers, I'd love to see that. However, they're all going to tell you bullshit.
What are they going to tell you?
That the men they hire are just great and they didn't mean to discriminate and they didn't mean to do any of this stuff. But it's, it's hard to get the truth out of these people. But if you look at everything.
I mean, the thing is that this wage gap thing, it's been legislated against since the
it has been.
1960s.
So
if you can prove as a woman that there is an actual discrepancy between wages between your male coworkers, you can bring a lawsuit.
But that's the problem, is people do things so secretively now. Ageism, racism, sexism, all of it.
But okay,
That can be done in such ways where it's avoidable to be sued against.
I think, look, ultimately,
It's definitely not as bad as it used to be. I'm not saying like the sexism in the workplace is as bad as it was in the 60s or 50s. It's way better now, and I'm so grateful that it's better now. However, it still exists. And acknowledging that it's still, even if it's like only 5% exists, it's still there.
so you're saying 95 cents to $1.
I don't know.
What do you think is the number?
I don't know.
Well, you said there's a wage gap.
Well,
You would
it
have to
depends on
articulate
each
what that
company.
is.
It depends on each person.
What do you
So-
think about Google, for example? They did this internal audit hoping to reinforce some of this feminist nonsense, and it actually found that they were overpaying women